I'm not too happy, actually, about some of the responses that I've seen. I don't normally care about responses, but in this case, I've got something to say. Hey, it's Dallas. Time for another director's commentary, review, reaction video, whatever you want to call it. Today we tackle episode 3 of season 2. Probably I would put this in the top 2 or 3 most talked about, most reacted to episodes that The Chosen has ever done to this point. A couple things about it that caused the live chat to go crazy when we were airing it. One was the decision to show this episode right after episode 2. I'm fairly certain that it's the first time in the history of television, if you want to consider us television, which I think you should, that an episode I think has been just surprise dropped, like one right after the other. I remember when I said in the live stream when episode 2 ended, I had told people there was a surprise. I had said, stick with it, watch through the whole episode. At the end of the episode, there's going to be a surprise. And there were still a few people who left because they're tired of me talking. They don't want to hear it. They think it's just going to be maybe something like a discount on merchandise or gifts or whatever. All that to say, they missed out. And so those who stuck around got a chance to see episode 3 that night. But also, there are about 4 things in the episode that have generated a ton of response, and I'm going to go through the 4 of them. Number 1 is the shot, which is the opening 14 minutes of the episode, which was all one shot. I'm going to give you a few fun, interesting tidbits about that, how it happened, the miracle that took place, the mistakes that were made, all the little things that made that happen. The second thing is the speech by Mother Mary about the birth of Christ. That has generated a lot of response and a lot of conversation. The speech, I call it the speech, the Simon towards Matthew speech, and that argument that really inflamed. I've got a lot to say about that, and I'm not too happy, actually, about some of the responses that I've seen. I don't normally care about responses, but in this case, I've got something to say. If that scene bothered you, you're definitely going to want to hear what I have to say about it. And then the ending. One of the most interesting endings we've done. It's the first time we've ever ended the episode without music, and there's no music playing over the closing credits, so I'll talk a little bit about that. So, first of all, the shot. As you know, in nearly every scene ever, in movies and television, and certainly on The Chosen, there's editing. Shoot the scene from multiple angles, and you do multiple takes. So you'll set up typically a wide shot, what we call a master. You'll shoot that a couple of times. That kind of establishes the geography of the scene. And then you shoot a medium or a close-up, but you'll shoot multiple shots of each of the people in the scene, and that's called coverage. And then in the editing room, assemble all of those shots together, and you pick the best parts from each of those angles. The beauty of editing is that you're allowed to get rid of the moments that you thought weren't quite as strong as some of the other moments. And so it really is a valuable tool, and you can impact the pacing of the scene. Rarely do you ever just use all of one take in a scene. It's extraordinarily rare. That's okay. And typically you're going to Frankenstein these scenes a little bit as you assemble them. And then you can also change the pacing, speed things up, slow things down, focus on certain things, cut some lines out. That's very common. Sometimes you just go, oh wow, now that I'm seeing this scene played out, I'm going to cut a few lines. Well, when you do what's called a oneer, that term comes up every couple days on set. Is this a oneer? Sometimes we plan it out in advance, like we did for this episode. But sometimes you just, the day is going long, or you just get to the scene and you're working through it. My cinematographer, Akis, and I will be talking through the scene, and we'll go, you know what, this feels like a oneer. Or Adam, our assistant director, will be like, do I smell a oneer? It's rare, but we occasionally do it, which means we're going to shoot the whole scene in one shot, no different angles. So it usually is like 9, 10, 11 takes even to get it to where you want it. And after each take, you go in, I talk to the actors, all right, here's what we're going to fix. Examples of a oneer in this show so far have been, for example, episode 1 of season 1, when we do the walk and talk with Simon and Andrew, when they're walking through the neighborhood, talking about the plan that Simon has to maybe get them out of debt. That's just one example of a oneer. We've done that a few times. Well, this was by far our most complicated one. We decided to do the entire first half of the episode in one shot. It started with, what if we shoot just the first part in one shot, meaning the walk and talk between Philip and Matthew, which was then going to lead into the opening credits. And then we said, what if we went even further, in one shot? That would be kind of cool if we followed them into the camp and walked around the camp for a little bit. And eventually it was Akis, our cinematographer, who said, what if we just do everything that happens during the day in one shot? And that's when all of us started to get a little nervous thinking about it, but also really excited and thinking about the possibilities. Now, this is really important. You don't want people distracted from the content of the scene by the logistics of the scene. You don't want them to be thinking about the camera angles the whole time. You don't want to be thinking of how cool everything looks. You want them to be focused on the content. In this case, we believed that this served the content, that it helped enhance the moment, the urgency of the moment, the real timeness of the moment, the fact that they'd been there all day, the fact that they're talking in real time as this stuff is happening, as Jesus is healing people. And throughout the scene, in fact, I wrote into the script that throughout the whole scene, you hear celebrations, you hear busyness, you hear the logistics of what's happening while the disciples are backstage. And they're taking turns helping Jesus with crowd control and with organization and whatnot. I just felt like it would really help the urgency of the scene to do it all in one shot and really make it feel authentic. The conversation would feel really natural and organic. So the actors really had to prepare, make sure that they got everything down, because once you start rolling, you're not going to stop. And that means that any mistakes you make, you're just going to have to keep going. Or if they're significant mistakes, we're going to have to start over, which is really painful. So one of the biggest things that you have to take into consideration in a shot like that is our Steadicam operator. A Steadicam is a camera where the camera rests on this big mount, and you attach the camera, you build the camera into the mount, and it keeps it balanced so that when you're walking around, it doesn't shake, and it keeps it smooth. And so it's got a system of weights and balances, and it's complicated, and I don't even really understand it. But we brought in this specialist who had a unique rig that allowed us to not only stay in one height level, but he could go down and up and around more easily. We brought him in, his name was Chad. The biggest problem that he had was he has to hold this thing for 15 minutes, and it is exhausting, and it is heavy. It's designed to be helpful in many ways, and so it's not like he's just walking around holding 60 pounds out in front of him the whole time, but he is holding 60 pounds, and he's using his back and his shoulders and his core to do all this, and after a few minutes, it is extraordinarily difficult. So we knew that to do it in one shot for the whole day would require multiple rehearsals. Normally, a rehearsal of a scene takes like 15 minutes tops. Then you send the actors away, and we build the first shot, and then we build the second shot. In this case, we knew we would have to rehearse for hours. And we knew that also to have that many actors dressed and made up, including Mother Mary, who requires 2.5 hours of makeup, we knew that to do all that, it would take at least half the day just to get them all made up. We would have to get them to rehearse without all their hair and makeup and wardrobe, or maybe some of them had it on, but some of them didn't. We'd walk through the scene multiple times, figure out where the camera was going to go, and choreograph all of that. And that took several hours. And so my cinematographer and myself and the Steadicam operator and the actors, we all talked through it. All right, where's the camera going to go in this line? All right, how do we get to Thomas? How do we get to Rayma? How do we get to Big James in time for his line without it looking too extreme? So we'd get halfway through the scene and realize, okay, it's actually going to be better if you stand here. So we had to orchestrate it. It became choreography, and it became a dance that we had to figure out. And so over the course of multiple rehearsals, you'd be going through it, and then you go, oh, that's not going to work. A few attempts he's using his cell phone, because obviously he doesn't want to exhaust himself by the end of the day. So by the middle of the day, we felt like we had a pretty good handle on it, and we figured we would do about 3, maybe 4 takes while the sun was out, because we knew we would need multiple takes, because we knew there was no way you'd be able to go through it without any mistakes. And then the other thing was we figured we really wanted to get one good take during the day when the sun was up, so that we would have the ability at the end of the day when the sun was going down to do one more take. We figured that take as the sun was going down wouldn't be perfect, but it would be great if when we got to it, it was a safety, that we already had it, we knew we had it, and now we have a chance to get a luxury shot. If that turns out, that's the ideal situation, because the lighting is so beautiful at what we call magic hour. So when it's magic hour where the sun is just going down, the light is absolutely beautiful, and you only get it for a limited time, which is why most scenes aren't shot in magic hour, because you can't shoot all the different takes in that time, and they won't look the same. But we have that chance in a oneer. Well, first take we do, pretty clunky, we get all the way through it, but there's multiple mistakes. Second take we do, we had to stop halfway through because A, our Steadicam operator was getting exhausted, and B, there were enough mistakes that had been made that we knew we weren't going to use it anyway. So then we get ready for our third take, which is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon or so, and we realize halfway through the shadows from the sun were so strong that you could see the shadows of our whole crew, our small little crew that was following the actors around, on the actors themselves. So he just stopped halfway through. He said, this is unusable. And what we had was, in our crew setup, was a little crew. It was our Steadicam operator, an assistant cameraman, our sound guy who has to walk around with his boom mic. So he's following behind the camera, and of course he can't get in front of it. So he has to just find these spots. I mean, the larger crew was all hiding out in the bushes, way away from everybody. And then myself and our cinematographer and our script supervisor and our producer and post-production supervisor, Chris. So in Jesus's tent, during the take, it's the one tent that's actually closed, and you can see it closed tight because it was windy, and that was Chris, our producer, holding it tight, and we were all sitting in there watching. And so several times when you see the camera go around, you can actually see that tent, and you can't see us, but we're inside that tent watching on monitors. We get to that shot, and we realize the shadows are way too strong, so there's no way we're going to be able to do this take. So we realize we're stuck, and we're going to have to wait until the sun is going down, because then there won't be shadows, and it'll also look great. So we had to sit there for over 2.5 hours just waiting. And this is where it got really scary, because we knew we would only have one chance at it. Literally one shot, no pun intended. And I went out into the field, I remember, and I was just praying, and I was like, God, you've taken us to the edge of the Red Sea so many times on this project. My wife calls these Red Sea moments, where you literally have no options. It's out of your control, and as the director, it's especially out of my control, because I can't make any adjustments during the shot. So you're just hoping and praying that, like, in this one opportunity that we have, we get it. And I was just like, God, look, it's your will and this is your project, and I'm not going to, treat God like a genie who grants wishes. But I was like, if you're trying to teach us something, if you're trying to teach us to rely on you and to be surrendered, lesson learned, okay? I'm here and I'm surrendered and my arms are outstretched, and I just pray that you would at least, just at the very least, give us favor in our wisdom and our clarity, and Chad, our Steadicam operator, just give him strength so that he'll be able to get through the whole shot. And if it doesn't work, then make that obvious too, and that we'll know that maybe we shouldn't have tried this. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. So finally the sun's getting ready to go down, and we have this one opportunity. And the first 2 takes, something went wrong. An actor got a line wrong, and it was significant, so we had to start over. And the second time it happened, now the sun was going down even further, and now we had no chance. In terms of, like, if there was a slight problem, we had no chance to fix it. And I literally walked out of the tent and I slammed my script. I had my script in my hand. I slammed it to the ground because I was so frustrated. And all the actors who were waiting in that part of the shot all saw that. And I don't have a temper normally. And when I do, I don't normally show it because I don't want to project any kind of displeasure. But I was so frustrated. Slammed the paper down and got the actors together, got them calm. And now it's time. This is it, finally. Action. And we're just sitting there watching in the tent. I'm standing there, and at one point it almost felt like I was holding hands with my producer, Chris. Just please, 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 please. And our assistant director, Adam, who's hiding in the healing tent, the Jesus healing tent, he's hiding in there reading the script and listening. He can't see, just listening. And every time an actor would pause, or you could tell that they were kind of struggling with a line, he would just be like, oh my gosh, please, please, please. And we're just watching, and the camera's moving, and we're getting through the scene, and we're halfway through, and we're like, all right, it's going. And then we get further and further, which makes it even more painful, because you're like, oh, if there's a mistake now, it's going to be even worse. At one point, the camera kind of jostled a little bit. We ended up fixing it in post-production where we could kind of stabilize that shot, but that was like and then we could tell that Chad, our Steadicam operator, was starting to struggle. I mean, you can't really tell in the final version, but we know the shots really well. We knew he was barely hanging on. I mean, and you could hear him actually in the microphone. Like breathing really heavy because it was so exhausting. Finally, we get to the shot, into the shot. Mary comes to the group. They're gathered on Mary. I'm like, okay, here we go. There's been no mistakes in this yet. Going around the camera, and finally she says, all right, I see the food, and the shot is over. And we yelled cut. And I even get emotional right now remembering it, just because it was such a relief. But, this is funny to think about this, that I'm emotional now thinking about it. But my Keith, my cinematographer, turns to me and he says, please tell me that's it. Because he couldn't hear anything. He wasn't listening. He's just watching the shot. And I'm like, I think we got it. And Chris, my producer, just literally is like, oh my gosh. I come out of the tent. Our Steadicam operator literally is collapsed on the ground. He is on his butt, head in his hands, drenched in sweat, trying to drink. I go up to him. I put my hand on his head, and he's like, did we get it? And I go, I think we got it. And everyone cheered for him, just clapped. The whole cast clapped for him just because of the amazing work that he'd done.
Thank you. We did it.
Work. That's right here. Good sign, but just get back on it.
All right, one more quick one.
Yeah, all right. Do it again. Do it again.
Just for safety.
Right just for safety. Yeah, one more for safety.
And I went up to Yoshi, who plays Philip. And Yoshi has a couple of moments in that scene that are crucial, kind of hinge points that kind of keep the scene going. And I just said to him, thank you so much for keeping it together. Thank you so much for your work. And I burst into tears. Hey, man, you really helped keep that together. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, no, absolutely. This is the funnest day.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Are you okay?
No, I'm just...
Dude,
relieved.
Dude, that was a lot for everybody.
I just started crying. And he's like, what's wrong? And I go, I'm just so relieved. I'm so grateful to all of you for nailing this. And I just knew we had something special. And then we went and watched it. And the lighting is so beautiful. The sun going down in one shot. You can actually see the sun going. You can actually experience this in real time. It was so beautiful. And it was historic. For television, I don't know if there's ever been a longer shot. So it was really powerful. And it was just something that felt like very Chosen-esque. In The Chosen we say, get used to different. In The Chosen we say, we're doing a new thing. Isaiah 43, one of our key mottos, behold, I am doing a new thing. We feel like we've pushed the envelope now just to get to this point. Let's just keep pushing it. We've got nothing to lose. Let's just go for it. And we're going to keep pushing the envelope and keep doing things that have never been done before. So that shot really, I think, defines the season for us in many ways, and just what The Chosen is all about. Taking chances, being led to the edge of the Red Sea. And the Israelites have nothing left but a miracle. And the sea needs to part for them to be able to survive. And that's what happens to us all the time. And then, of course, the excellence of it, the beauty of the actors' performances and the cinematography is just something something that we're very, very proud of. That went into the second half of the show, which is also a little bit unprecedented. It's just people talking for the whole rest of the episode. It's an idea that I had from the beginning of the show. I always wanted to do a scene like that where the disciples were just sitting around and talking and figuring out what was going on in their lives, figuring out what it's like to follow. I was inspired in this scene a lot by the movie The Breakfast Club. There's a beautiful, amazing scene in The Breakfast Club where the five of them are just sitting there and they just talk for a while. A lot of the scene was influenced by The Breakfast Club, a movie that I really love. The thing that stands out most in that scene is the speech by Mary. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's one of the things that stands out. Of course, the Simon speech, which I'll get to in a moment, is the thing that most stands out. But the Mary speech about the birth of Christ is something that I was really proud of. And I remember writing it just being really intent on wanting to put you in that moment of what Mary might have been thinking. This is where it starts to get a little bit controversial, because this is where, Catholics and Protestants tend to disagree on Mary, whether she was perfect, whether she was a perpetual virgin, how precious, how pure, what was the nature of Mary. But I'm not a Catholic. I don't share the majority Catholic opinion on Mary. And so when I portray her as talking about the birth and how she talks about how it was messy, and there are some Catholics who do not believe that at all. There's a lot of nuance in the Catholic Church about this, so I'm not going to speak for Catholics, but there's a variety, there's kind of a spectrum of belief on what the birth of Jesus would have been like. I come from the belief that Mary would have had pain in childbirth, and I come from the belief that the birth would have been a relatively normal birth. I know that some of you are watching going, oh my gosh, that's heresy. That's just how it's going to be. I guess we're just going to have difference of opinion, and that's okay. It's one of my favorite moments in our show's history. And Vanessa Benavente, who plays Mary, really nailed it. She is just a beautiful actress. And the fact that every day she has to get 2.5 hours worth of makeup done and has to act with all this makeup, and between every take it has to get, adjusted or looked at and fussed over. It makes it even harder, I think, to concentrate. But she just does such a beautiful job, and I was so proud of this scene and so proud of this moment. But a key line that she says is, he doesn't need me anymore. And I guess he hasn't needed me for a long time, not since we taught him how to walk and talk. That, of course, was a setup for later in the episode. All right, I want to take a very quick break. The hoodie that I'm wearing right now, our best-selling hoodie at thechosengifts.com, www.thechosengifts.com, along with books and DVDs and all these gifts that we are for yourself and others. It really does help us do videos like this, so please check that out if you get a chance. Every time you purchase a gift for yourself or others, it keeps our channel going, and it keeps the ability to do future episodes and seasons going, and it allows us to keep making the show free. But then it gets to the Simon Matthew piece. This is where we've had the most controversy, and where I don't care at all what people say. I mean, I want them to like it, but criticism doesn't really bother me, and I'm comfortable enough in the show and in my relationship with God and in my artistic vision that people can criticize it. It just doesn't bother me. This is a case where we get to the climax of the scene where Simon stands up and says to Matthew, do you know what it's like to be Jewish? Here's what I strongly believe about this scene. That everything that Simon says, up until he says, I'll never forgive it. I think when he says, of course, I can't forgive it, I'll never forgive it, I think that that's wrong. Obviously, anything can be forgiven. And I think it's not a spoiler to know that Simon will eventually learn that. But everything he says up until that point is, I believe, absolutely correct. Even the questions he starts to ask Matthew. When he says, what about you? How has this been difficult for you? And Matthew says, my life has not been easy. You see even Mary Magdalene kind of go, I wish he wouldn't have said that. And Simon responds appropriately. Oh, really? Oh, what was so difficult about it? Now, again, he's being sarcastic. He's not handling this in the very best way possible, but his words are correct. And Matthew has things to answer for. Things that he has not repented of, things that he has not said sorry for. And I remember when I was writing the scene, I even had Andrew, who was one of the audience favorites, speak up and defend Simon. I was thinking of the audience to some extent. I'm thinking, what? They need to see people besides just Simon express themselves fairly and honestly to Matthew. Because I know Simon can sometimes arouse some frustration or anger on the part of the audience because he's the most tempestuous one. That didn't seem to help. So many of you, even while the scene was happening, were like, whoa, too much. Tell Simon to back off. Simon's being harsh. Simon's being a bully. Stop it, Simon. Please. Oh, this is hard to watch. And it is hard to watch, and I'm okay with that. There are many things that are going to be hard to watch in this show. But everything Simon said was absolutely correct up until he said, I can't forgive it. Think of the speech he gives about the Jewish people. That is absolutely true. And did you know that Jesus was someone, when he was listing the types of sinners that were the worst of sinners, he included tax collectors. But Jesus even acknowledged tax collectors as problematic, as worthy of being in a special category, because they betrayed their own people to the most oppressive and murderous occupier, potentially in the history of the world, besides, of course, the Nazis and a few others. But I mean, the Romans were rough stuff, and the Romans were the bullies. So let's do a quick compare and contrast here. Matthew chose to work for the Romans, who had occupied the Jewish territory and were brutal and taxed them to the point where they could barely survive. Matthew chose to work for them. He didn't have to. They weren't forced to work for them. In fact, when Romans would come into these particular particular towns and look for tax collectors, a lot of the tax collectors bid for services. Like, I'll be able to collect this much in taxes. I'll be able to collect this much in taxes. And they would pick the one who could get them the most. And so Matthew chose to do that. He gave up a lot. There's another video on YouTube that I'll link in the description that speaks to this that I really like. I want to give them credit for this. He mentioned that Matthew gave up a lot to be a tax collector. That meant his religion. He betrayed his own people to become a tax collector. Now, we portray Matthew as being on the Asperger spectrum or the autism spectrum. So we know that perhaps his motives weren't quite as greed-based as others might have been. I think for him it was a mathematics decision, and he sees everything in mathematics and logic, and it had a hard time with the supernatural, a hard time with faith. And we explore that in future episodes, even of season 2. But Matthew made a decision that was a devastating decision to his fellow Jews. And think about what he did with Simon, in our show at least. Simon makes a deal to get himself out of debt. Now, it's a bad deal. Simon ended up not following through on and apologized for and repented of. That's a very important point. He says that in the scene. But when he makes a deal to get out of debt, what does Matthew do? Does Matthew leave it alone? No, Matthew goes to the Roman occupier in the region and tattles on Simon and says, I don't think he's trustworthy. This is what he does. And he accepts the assignment of going to follow Simon around and try to get him in trouble. And then we say that because Simon has yelled at him a couple times for it, we're saying that Simon is the bully? I mean, look, I don't ever judge how someone interprets the show. So you interpret the show however you want, but like as an observer, I'm like, I think Matthew has been a far bigger bully than Simon. But here's something that's important. Right now, as Philip says to Matthew, was doesn't matter. Am is all that matters. And Simon has not quite yet accepted Matthew's am. And that's true. And Simon is tough. And Simon is being too harsh in his wording. Well, not in his wording as much, in his approach. And Andrew says it. He's not wrong. He maybe needs to be more delicate about it, but he's not wrong. And Thomas says, I was a successful businessman and I could never get ahead. Like, they had a right to be frustrated. And even when Simon says to John, are you on Matthew's side? John says, no, of course not. Why does he say, of course not? Well, of course he's not going to be on the side of a tax collector, but he's saying you have problems too. And that is the gospel. Simon hasn't fully grasped the gospel yet. And Jesus hasn't kind of nailed Simon for that yet. And eventually that's coming. Now, Jesus does things slowly. And I saw a few people comment, I wish Jesus would have stopped as he was walking by the campfire and said something to Simon. Of course, that wouldn't have been the right choice, because what Jesus ended up doing was far more impactful than anything he could have said. I don't mind spending time on that moment. We even started a little hashtag Simon's not wrong, because everything Simon said except for that last part was absolutely correct. And Matthew hasn't apologized and hasn't repented of it. And he eventually, I believe, is going to have to. We'll see where this goes, and we do have a plan for Matthew and Simon and Jesus and all of that. It's going to be interesting. And as we do with The Chosen often, we set things up in advance. We set things up scenes in advance, we set them up episodes in advance, and we set them up seasons in advance. There's a lot more coming between Matthew and Simon and Matthew and the rest of the group. So that was a key scene. I love the performances. Just let's step outside for a second from the controversy about it. But Shahar gave one of, I believe, his best performances. I didn't do it over the top. We did it a couple different times, and that's what's beautiful about Shahar is he's willing to try things. And man, I mean, I think where we landed and where he landed was just perfect. I talked to Paris, who plays Matthew, a lot about it, saying Simon's making good points. So we're not going to treat this like you're just this victim. And Paris delivered it beautifully too. And then things start to escalate. And when they escalate to their highest degree is when Jesus emerges. And that's the fourth point of this episode, where I think has gotten the most discussion, the most reaction. All he does is walk by and says goodnight, and he's drenched in sweat, and he's got blood of people he's been healing on him. And what would it be like to spend the entire day with no breaks, healing people and dealing with pain and dealing with sadness and dealing with sin even? I mean, because people, as you know, Jesus did not only heal physical maladies, but spiritual maladies. And think of what he must have dealt with, and how we know in Scripture that when he did heal people, there's debate about this, but it seems like his power kind of goes out of him a little bit, and that maybe he gets drained each time. That's up for debate. I don't know about that. But I know that at the end of a day like this, Jesus would have been absolutely exhausted. So all he does is walk past, and it reminds the disciples, oh, this is what has been going on all day. This is what's most important, and this is what we're not focused on. Ooh. And they all respond in different ways, but the consistent response is a little bit of shame, a little bit of humility. Simon to the point where he just doesn't even look. Andrew wants to look. I think Andrew's watching. Thomas can't look. A lot of them just look down. Some of them just keep staring. I think they want to drink this in. And then what happens? Mother Mary gets her opportunity to be needed. And I remember when I was with my co-writer Tyler, and I said, because the original ending for this episode was just going to be Jesus getting ready for bed. That was it. And we were just going to end with no, and I was thinking maybe no music, and it's just Jesus getting ready for bed and just collapsing and praying. And that was going to be it. And then when I said to Tyler, what if Mother Mary got a chance to help him? And she came over and washed his hands and feet, and he started crying. I started crying, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's going to wreck people, and it's going to wreck the disciples, and it's just going to be beautiful. So she gets a chance to wash his hands and his feet. And then we just made the decision. The music is beautiful. Ruby, who is our kind of musical narrator, you hear her voice during key moments, comes in at the right time. Our composers, Matt and Dan, did a beautiful job. Just minimalist, just didn't want to overdo it, just kind of help you feel it. And then it goes away, and then we just end with no music and no music over the credits. And I just really wanted people to settle into that moment and to have the feeling that the disciples were feeling. Certainly an episode that's gotten a lot of attention, a lot of controversy, a lot of conversation, a lot of admiration, a lot of criticism. All of it's great. It's all fun. That's what this show is about. That's what I love as an artist, is getting to see. I remember when I was in 9th grade and I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and there was a scene where Jack Nicholson is denied the opportunity to watch a World Series in this mental hospital. And he ends up going into the TV, and just to get himself riled up and to get Nurse Ratched upset, he starts broadcasting a fake World Series. And it gets so exciting and so monumental. It was one of the greatest scenes in movie history, in my opinion, and it changed my life. And I said, whatever that is, I want to do that. I want to generate emotion in the hearts of an audience in the way that that scene did for me. So when I see an episode like episode 3 generate the kind of response that it has, it's just a battery charge as an artist. It's not the whole sole reason why I do it, but it has been fun. So I hope you enjoyed that look, that reaction, analysis, recap of episode 3. This will end up probably being one of the longest recaps I've ever done, just because this episode had so much to talk about. But thank you so much for checking it out. And remember, it's not your job to feed the 5,000. It's only provide the loaves and fish. God bless you. Talk soon.